Welcome back, everybody, to Navigating Amateur Motocross, episode number 17. We're thankful this episode is brought to you by our friends at Precision Transport. Extremely happy to welcome back my co-host of the show, Mr. Derek Harris. How the hell are you, buddy?
Good, man. Good to see you, Mr. Robb. Been about another month. I can't believe it flew by that quick.
Yeah, it's crazy. And for those of you that are listening to this, you probably have noticed that every time we record a show, we have an episode that drops. So we hope that if you had any questions on anything that did drop today, please leave a comment in the below. And same thing here. I'm really looking forward to this subject today. Derek, I think it's interesting when we look at the idea of getting better day over day, week over week. This whole subject of recovery comes in, and I get asked quite often, what exactly is recovery? And we can dive into that a little bit, but I have to bounce the ball into your court. I wish I had two young boys that were starting to get into riding, especially since we've built our relationship together. I think it makes so much sense to start rotating motors and suspension and all that goes with it. But I have to be honest with you, I don't know what is the legitimate cadence. I know it's a little different for two strokes versus four strokes, but I kind of want to get our conversation started today. If I'm looking at human recovery, most people can understand, or at least at some level, get the idea of, okay, you've got to recover moto to moto. If you've got a multi-day weekend, right, you've got to recover from Saturday to Sunday. If you're doing a week-long race, you've got to do that for the whole week. Or if you're training, and all of our clients train in 6-week blocks, you've got to be able to recover from each one of those. What would you recommend? We have a very diversified listener group. We have some people that are just getting into the sport, and we have people that are trying to go all the way to pro. Where do you recommend people even begin on a rotation? Let's call it generically recovery. How do you appropriately recover a motorcycle to get the most out of it?
That's a great question. And it's situational, which is like you say, it's all context related, which makes it challenging. So if you're new to this sport and you're not a Loretta's level athlete and you're just riding around, it's not uncommon for people to be able to go 40 on, let's say, a 65 or an 85. Hey, we went 40 or 50 or 60 hours on a piston kit, and we went over 100 hours on a low end, on our engine, a connecting crankshaft, connecting rod, bearings, that kind of stuff. If the kid is correctly riding and he's not abusing the clutch, some of these guys will get a lot of hours out of those things. But as your ability ratchets up, usually with that comes, you're riding the bike harder and using more horsepower out of it. And number two, the kids kind of start to abuse the bike a little bit more. So they might use the clutch a little bit more aggressively. They're turning more RPMs all the time. And then all of a sudden your maintenance schedule needs to condense. And it's a really hard concept for families to understand, is like, well, we never had to do this before. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't go race Lorettas before, or you didn't go race nationals before. Or what we see routinely is we just started training full time at some facility. And I always tell parents to say, look, there's a cost of facility. There's the cost of all that. And some of that's sometimes cheaper. If you're trying to drive around 4 days a week to all these local tracks, that fuel cost time, right? But this facility sounds cheap. But what you're going to find very quickly is that a lot of these kids go put a gajillion hours on their equipment very quickly at a facility because it's so available and so right there. And you don't take those times off that you might at home. And all of a sudden they're like, man, I cannot keep up. I see this all the time. Family goes to the facility. Bikes are constantly down, especially if they're new at this. And so that interval, I always tell people, like, if you're a national level person on a two-stroke, 50 hours on a bottom end was a very, very successful run. And no race bike would I ever take to a big event with that type of hours. Absolutely not. I mean, it's just not worth the risk factor. I mean, look at the cost to be there. So, we're oftentimes, we don't charge crazy money for this kind of stuff. And we're actually probably gonna have to go up on rates. Inflation's been hitting us really hard. We've been looking at that and saying, oh, wow, like I can't do this for this price today anymore. But what does it cost to hook up your fifth wheel, get the wife and kids in the truck, go down however far it is to whatever big event you got, put your entry money in, your camping fee, your food, right? All the little crap you're going to buy along the way, your race gas, your truck fuel, all that crap. You had to insure the vehicle. You had to have the rig fee or your trailer. If you're doing out of a bumper pull or out of a pickup truck, there's a cost. And you get there and you got 52 hours or 48 hours or 35 hours on your motorcycle. And this is an important race to you, like a regional that's just kind of summing up right now. And your bike blows up. So what's that cost you? And I throw that in your court. I mean, how would you sum that up for the human physiology side? What would be the analogy there?
Well, I want to answer your question, but I want to elaborate at the same time. what I think is crazy is what broke on the motorcycle. And I don't know. Shoot me the cost of a 125 piston, ring, and cotter pin. Just throw
Yeah, I
it
mean,
price.
you're probably $200 in parts, maybe 250, depending on what you're paying.
So
And
you spend all that money.
nowadays, 200 in labor, at like retail, right? It's a 2-hour job, let's
So
say,
let's
to
say
do it right.
$500 total. So
Yeah.
you spent the time, the energy, the fuel, like you say, trucks rolling, depreciating, camper for a $500 rebuild. That's the opportunity cost of not getting it updated before you went there. And so if you're looking at what you spent to get there versus what it would, you went there and couldn't finish the job versus spending the $500 on top of what you already spent to go there, and you get to qualify for Lorettas, which is the reason why you went. It's That's why I wanted to elaborate on it, because when you were saying that, I was thinking, man, that would be very frustrating to spend all that money, opportunity cost of time and various resources to only watch it grenade itself, which it's not like it was a $500,000 investment. It was a $500 investment. You probably spend more money in fuel to get to the race than that
100%.
investment in the bike would have cost.
And it's the same with like so people seem to forget this. Our industry has developed hardware so well that bikes are pretty damn good. And so what happens is they don't recall the days. I do. I grew up in the era where the factory teams did top ends between motos.
Exactly.
So to them, the opportunity cost was we do not want to have a problem no matter what. So we're going to do this, especially at Loretta's. For example, Loretta's, people did this all the time because like, hey, I've got literally a day between today's race and tomorrow's race. And I'm sitting around, I got nothing better to do and I want to win. So I am going to take my motor apart. I'm going to put a fresh piston and ring in it. I'm going to check everything. And while I'm at it, I get to look at the engine, right? I get to say, hey, is there anything popping up in here that could go wrong? For example, on two strokes, reed pedals will cause you the worst headaches you've ever had if they're a little bit off or wrong. You're like, it's jetted wrong. You chase your ass all day long only to find out you had a bad reed pedal or something going on there. You get to look at that, right? And that's part of that process. Doing it right would be, we're not, people don't understand why you throw parts in the engine. It's not just to change the part. Like a 4-stroke, people say, oh, I need to do the top end on my 4-stroke. And I ask them why. Well, I need to put a piston and ring in there. They're used to the 2-stroke cadence. The reality is, we've talked about this, the piston and ring is the least of your worries on the 4-stroke. 99% of the time on a production 4-stroke, the pistons will outlast the other parts of that job, which means your timing chain stretching and kinking and going bad. Your valves need to be inspected and cleaned and looked at. Your valve springs are opening over 100 times a second at hard use. They're getting abused. So those are the items that really need to be inspected and looked at. Your valve seats and guides. So when somebody blows a 4-stroke up because of a top end failure, meaning something in the top half, the crank didn't go, but something let go on the top half, maybe a valve broke. It's hard to tell sometimes because the damage is so extensive in those engines. But a lot of times that's because a valve spring broke or got soft or got weak or a timing chain got way too stretched and it changed the valve timing events a little bit. For example, you get that timing chain stretched and you happen to have an engine that's really tight piston to valve on the exhaust side of the clearance. All of a sudden that becomes an issue. And then that spring gets a little bit soft and the valve's bouncing around in there and it hits the piston, boom, break a valve, motor blows up. And you say, oh, we spent, now let's say you do that. 4-stroke heads are not cheap. 4-stroke valve, like, when you buy a 4-stroke head, you buy the head, you buy the valves, you buy the valve springs, the buckets. Sometimes the cams go bad. You got to get a timing chain. That's really expensive versus saying, hey, we are on a schedule. For example, depending on the brand, it is determinant upon brand and the parts they use. Like a KTM's, in our opinion, and I wouldn't say this tomorrow. If they change a part, I'll tell you right now, it's not KTM, but KTM Husky gas gas right now in a 250F are light years ahead of everybody else when it comes to durability. But that said, doesn't mean they're immune to issues, right? But that said, like, if you have that failure, it's costing you thousands of dollars. Or, okay, you take it to shop if it's a full-blown race bike and it's important in your event, okay, maybe every 20 hours, we put a piston in it and we put a timing chain in it and we inspect and measure the valves and the valve guides and we put new valve springs in it because valve springs are cheap. And you do all those things. And if it's a full-blown national race bike that we built to the tilts, some of those hour intervals get down to 10 or sub 10. It depends on your budget, what you want to do, what the bike is. Like the Yamahas in 2018 through 2023, 2022, 2023, I can't think off the top of my head. They would snap timing chains. And they would do it if you had a mod bike at like hour 2, hour 1, hour 1.5. So if you went around the pits at Loretta's from 18 to 20, I think it's 3, whatever that new chassis came out, they updated it. 20 had to be 23, right? You would see every single prominent Yamaha team changing timing chains only between motos. It's not the hardest job on the planet, right? You got to know what you're doing, but you do it. And it sucks. You got to do it, but it's only a $22 part at the time or a $32 part. But they knew that that was the weak link of the engine. So they changed it to not have failure on track. If you're the dad who had a Yamaha, kept snapping timing chains going, oh, I just don't understand. We're spinning all this. And when you snap the timing chain, there goes your head, the valves, the piston, the cams, the cylinder. You're out $5,000 or $2,000 or $3,000. All you really needed to do, unfortunately, was either get off the Yamaha at the time or change your damn timing chains for $22 and a little bit of labor. But how many people did that?
When you guys were with Caden Braswell at Loretta's, what to what extent did you look at the bike, take the bike apart between Tuesday to Wednesday, Wednesday to Thursday?
So he was on a 20-hour motor,
Okay.
essentially, that we would without fail inspect at 10. And so we
show up at Loretta's with how many hours already on it?
The last year he won, he showed up with a bike that he raced brand new, essentially at regionals, and had like a day of shakedown, and then raced regionals, and then pre-Loretta's put a little bit of time on it. So that bike probably had like 3.5 to, I think I'd have to ask his mechanic. I think it was sub 5 hours, but right around that number. Okay. And that is enough hours for us on that package. We know, they didn't break timing chains and stuff. We know that, okay, if it makes it to 3 hours, that motor's as solid as it's ever going to be. Like, we know all the parts are kind of put through the ringer. They're good. There's, if we forget to tighten a bolt, it's going to grenade within 30 minutes, right? If not less. If, you have an inclusion in a part or something, typically that's going to show up at a low hour number. So yeah, it showed up like that. His previous year that he won the B title, that bike also exact same cadence. Raced regionals. They put like 2 days of practice on it. Raced regionals. Good. Bike's good. A little bit of practice. Go race Lorettas. And I actually think he still owns that bike and it's sitting in his garage. So whatever those total hours were is now sitting in his garage somewhere, right? But
so if I come in with a bike, I bought a 10-hour motor package.
Yeah,
I'm coming in with 3 to 4 hours. Would you, let's say that I paid for all of your expenses to be at Loretta's there to babysit me for an entire week.
Yeah.
What would you have done after practice before Tuesday, after Tuesday before Wednesday? What would you have done, if anything? Would you have even taken the top end off, looked at anything?
Yeah, on his bike, no. But I would, like, a lot of the factory teams, like Star at the time frame, would inspect the valve clearances every moto. So every 25 minutes, you just check, because that's telling you if a valve's tightening up. You can make sure the timing chain looks good, roll it over. Those are the types of things. But as long as I always tell people, if your bike starts and idles at all, like it starts, it's telling you that you have compression and that the valves are sealing up and that generally your cans are in time, right? So those are all positive. So like if something else is giving you a headache, 90% of the time, if it starts and idles, it's not mechanical. It's probably electric, some electrical problems. Now, that opens a can of worms. Like in Loretta's, if you're paying a professional to do this, how you wash your bike, being very meticulous about that. If you have quick moto turnaround, sometimes you don't wash your bikes, right? You got to be very smart about that, because a water will just ruin your weekend. And it only takes one little screw up to ruin your weekend, right? So some parents don't think about that. They hit it at Loretta's, it's all muddy, and they hit that pressure washer up on all that stuff, and then they chase issues all week. Or at Loretta's, you run these $high race fuels that absorb water, and all of a sudden you get water in your fuel, or you didn't seal up the air box well enough, and a little water ran down through your air filter, or at night it's so humid that it condenses inside of there. We've seen that problem with clients left and right. Like people, like, you tell them, hey, this is a problem. Oh, we're fine. They don't really know. All of a sudden they start sputtering or spitting or chasing an issue. And it's like, hey, you got water in your gas. Oh, no way. I'm like, I promise you, take that carburetor off intact, carefully pull the bowl, and you'll see water floating around in there. And it happens all the time. And so those are the types of things that, if you're really meticulous about it, which you should be, those are things you got to keep in mind. But like on the 4-stroke side, Caden, pretty simple. Now, if you're on a 2-stroke and you wanted to win, you're like, Derek, we're top 5. We want to win. I would be open to doing, at minimum, I would do inspections probably if you wanted to do every moto, depending on your moto cadence, or if we had motos within 3 hours or 2 hours. Okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to go two motos, right? But then every single evening, let's pull the top end apart. Let's look at everything. Let's inspect. Let's put it back together. And if I were prepared for that, we would already have our piston. It's already been checked and measured with that bore. We've already got the ring gap set before we came there, right? We have everything laid out. We have all our gaskets we're going to select. We have the thicknesses we want. Like, that's just going to be in a baggie, ready to go. Boom, drop it on. You probably, at that level, you're trying to win. You're going to have a spare cylinder in case you see something, things like that. And like you said, at some point, you got to be smart. Like in the 85s and super minis, you should probably have two pretty much the same bike, so that you have a total backup. Something goes wrong. And actually, that SEBA kid we had discussed a little bit, I forget, but at Spring Nationals this year, I don't recall. He's got a guy named Randy doing, their buildings and stuff, and we have a little help and involvement on the back end of that. And I don't recall what issue they had. I know they had a big issue, and I don't recall what it was. And like I think he had to put a motor in the bike. Like, and I don't remember why, like a crank issue. They forgot to mix gas, something stupid, right? Something that went wrong. And so luckily they're prepared. They have an engine. So all he had to do was yank it out, put it in, and away you go. And, and then he had enough parts that evening to go through, sort that engine out as another backup, right? In the evening. But there's nothing worse when you have one race engine and then you have a headache and you're relying on someone like me or someone else to be able to fix this problem for you in a pinch, in a hurry. Sometimes it's not achievable, right? You have this turn time that's just not doable. So being prepared, like you said, opportunity cost. Now I know it's hard to get engines, but opportunity cost, you're at Loretta's, that's a multi-$1,000 expenditure all said and done, not just to get there, but the regionals, your training, your prep, your whatever. And I don't care how you do it, right? It's expensive.
Yep. Just to be there for weeks.
Right. To not get, what do I call it? To not to interrupt you, but dollars, what do you call it? What's your dollar amount per lap spun at that track?
Yeah.
It's a lot. So you want to spend every single lap you can out there. So, to me, it's not about the result per se. It is, but it's about getting to turn laps out there. That's super important.
Absolutely. What's the worst thing you've ever seen at the end of a day? It doesn't matter if your moto's at 8, 1, or 4 in the afternoon. At the end of the day, what's the most impactful thing that you caught before it became a problem?
Well, it's a great question. I think number one, and this drives me nuts, we talked about it on the show. I have we're doing less suspension now than we used to. And there's various reasons to that, just timing wise, but I have time available and I'm not going to the tracks anymore. So we still help out key individuals that are friends of mine that I like, that, I can help and make an influence on. But like the mail order thing, you got to work with me. We're going to send you out what we know works for someone and for that bike and that chassis, but it's not for you. And that's the unfortunate side of suspension. It's very hard. I'll say that we have seen people show up like a couple of years ago, I had a client showed up with suspension that had never been ridden at Loretta's. We talked about this. I don't understand this. Like, not only have they never ridden it, they'd never ridden in that setting. Like, they had just sent it out to someone to get it just done before Loretta's. And we're watching the bike in practice, and I'm like, hey, that shock's like not coming out. It's not rebounding. I'm like, and at first I'm just watching. He's a good client of mine, good friend of mine. I try to stay clear of any of those decisions,
Yep.
Let's stay out of it. We're just buddies. But I'm like, hey, watching all these bikes go by, his shock will like not come out. And I'm like, hey, watch his bike when he leaves that jump. Just tell me what you see. I'm not going to tell you anything. He's a pretty smart guy. And he's like, that shock ain't coming out, is it? And I'm like, no, something's up. So we go back to the truck. They said, just go push on it. And sure enough, like you push down and it didn't come back up. It would kind of very, very, very slowly come up. And I'm like, go push on all his other motorcycles. They had like 7 motorcycles between 2 boys, 250, 450. They had a ton of bikes and not a single one of them did that. And I'm like, well, number one, that's a problem. You need to take that shock off and you need to sort out what's up. And then number 2, you need to just put on a shock that he knows, he trusts, he's ridden, he's whatever. So they do that. I would say that we didn't preemptively catch that, but luckily we were able to identify right there in practice before the moto started and before his second practice. You really need to pay attention as a dad. And the way I looked at it was, I could be the biggest dumbass when it comes to suspension on the planet, but I can watch every other motorcycle. If my bike does something way differently than everybody else's motorcycle, we have a problem. Right. Because I can kind of guarantee that at least half of the bikes out there have their suspension close. So, and then when it's, if you can see something visually, not like, squint your eyes. I mean, if you're like, wow, that shock's not coming out. I'm not talking it was coming out like slower. I'm talking like it's up the whole jump.
Compressed. Yeah.
Something's up, right? So
did the rider,
go ahead.
Did the rider make any comments about it?
I think yes and no, right? I always joke with people, your kid's going to bitch with suspension at Loretta's. I promise. So when do you take it? When do you don't? Right. And so this scenario, the track's rough. I'm like, yeah, we actually do think it is pretty rough because your bike's not right, And so,
sure.
Now, how could he have prevented that? Well, what did we do when we went back to the truck? We pushed on it. When you put your it's not the perfect test. Don't get me wrong. It's not the dyno, right? But you put your bike together and push on your suspension. It should feel like what suspension feels like. Right. So when you pushed on his and it just doesn't come back up, like, hey, do any of your other bikes do that? No. Okay. Something's up, right? This bike should come back. And one of the things that could happen there is your clicker's just all the way in. That was one of the things we checked. That is possible. Some bikes, you turn that clicker all the way in and it makes a big enough difference that this rebound just will not come out, depending on your valving settings, your spring rate, your bike weight, all these factors. So we went and double checked, because that's the number one mistake some people might make when they get their suspension back. Hey, have you verified that the settings are what they told you they should be? Half the time, the shop might forget. So double check your clickers. Put your bike on, have your kid go do that, be accountable, because you should never show up on the track with, what do you say? Hey, did you check your sag before you went out? No. Okay, well, your clickers is in the same category. You should know where your clicker settings are at before you go out there, especially if you played with it. You know what? On a Wednesday before Loretta's, we went and played with our clicker settings and we have no clue where they're at. Well, that's not going to do you any justice when you need to go adjust it. So, yeah, that would be something we caught. Motor wise, we've had a lot of people have issues with fuel. I mean, it's just the number one common issue at Loretta's, and it could be anything. So one of the things I recommend to people is filter your fuel. You should do this all the time. But it's like eating good food for your body. Guess what? Carburetors, now fuel injected bikes can tolerate this. They have pre-filters and in-tank filters and in-injector filters. So if you're pulling junk out of, your fuel injection system, that's a big problem. You must have sucked a ton of crap. Carbureted bikes cannot tolerate it at all. We don't have a really good filtering system. For whatever reason, it's never came about. And so any amount of small particulate will ruin your day on a carburetor. So we've had clients who had old gas cans. This cost us all the practices at Loretta's one year. Good bikes, and they're shook down and they're good. And then you load all these fucking gas cans up to go to Loretta's, because you got to get your generator gas and you're this gas and
Sure.
go to your garage and you lug every damn thing you got out of there. And just so happens that you go make this your race fuel can. Hey, that's our race gas can. Mix your gas, put it in there. And then they get 3 laps into practice, a lap, 2 laps, whatever. And the bike would start sputtering and running horrible and bogging and cutting out and doing all these things. Initially, we're like, okay, is it spark? Is it this? Is it that? But the first thing on a carbureted bike you should check is, okay, is my plug looking okay? And do I have trash on my gas? You got to go through those two things. So we pull the carb off carefully, pull the bowl out, and there's a little black stuff floating around in there, like little tiny particulate. Long story short, it was the little O-ring in the top of your plastic gas can on the cap. And it was old, and it was degrading. And every time you tightened it up, a little bit of it would fall into the can, and then you'd pour your gas in there. So all the factory teams take a funnel. They have a special little like nylon filter. And that's even on 4-strokes. I mean, we're talking even on bikes that have filters. And they pour their gas in through a filtered system. At a minimum, you should be doing that on your 2-stroke at Loretta's and at every race. And realistically, if you're going to take gas out of a metal can that's your fuel can and put it into a plastic can, that's fine. Maybe not ideal in moisture, but that's fine. At least filter it both. Every time you pour that gas from one to the other, filter your gas. And that won't prevent water per se, but at least it's giving you a good opportunity to filter any particulate out. And that's huge. I mean, that costs people motos left and right. And then water ingress. When you wash your bike, it gets down in there, or it condenses, it's hot, and when it cools off, the air draws in. And I cannot, if you have like half a tank full of gas and then that happens at night, you will get moisture in your gas tank. So one of the things you can do is either pour your fuel out in the evenings and whatever, or the other thing that works in aviation is fill your gas tank to the brim so there's no airspace available for water. So those are some tricks that you can do. And I mean, if it were me and I'm working on a 2-stroke at Loretta's, I think we're going to clean this carb every moto. 100%. We're going to go through it. We're going to clean it. We're going to drain some gas out. Water sits at the bottom underneath gasoline. So it'll collect at your petcock if you let it sit. So if you kind of just let some of that run out, you should be doing some of the steps necessary to prevent that failure.
Does the race gas quality decrease the potential of water accumulating?
Yes and no. Great question. The really high dollar race fuels that make horsepower, and I'm not a chemist, so I can't tell you exactly why, but I believe they have alcohols in them. They're really not supposed to say they do or they don't, but alcohol absorbs water. And so those fuels, the ones that actually make the most power, are the ones that are the most problematic for you at Loretta's. So I tell my guys, the difference in horsepower in our dyno, we should publish this on YouTube. I've got a whole list of those that I say on the show. The fuels that make power generally are more finicky, and the fuels that are the most consistent, the easiest to deal with, don't make the most horsepower, but they're the fuels that I recommend to my clients, because the difference in power might be half a horsepower, maybe one if you're really lucky on some of these 2-strokes, right? Like the MRX02 type fuel from VP, and there's Fuel Factory now and ETS. Maybe in the perfect world, there's a fuel out there that makes 2 horsepower, but I've yet to really consistently see that. Maybe a 1 horse, 1.5, and depending on your combination, whatever. But you can get, like, what's a lost moto cost you because your fuel had a problem? So I'd rather have, for example, like a C12, which is just dead consistent. and not all bikes need straight C12, right? But it doesn't have any oxygen in it. It doesn't have any alcohols in it. It doesn't absorb moisture. It has a big window of tuning. You can be too lean, you can be too rich, and it runs okay. You don't have to be on the money with your jetting every moto, which is another topic for a different day, but you really should be on the money for your jetting every moto. And that fuel will not give you headaches. But if you've never run it before Lorettas and you decide, well, I'm listening to Derek and I'm just going to go to C12 for Lorettas, that's bad too, because then maybe you're not jetted right, right? So you got to have your homework done. But if you're going to go to Lorettas to try to get every advantage out of your bike and start running fuels you've never run before because your VP sales guy tells you that this makes the most fuel, or some motor guy tells you this makes the most fuel, and you haven't really put that through the ringer yet, that's also a bad idea. Go to Loretta's,
Sure.
don't rock the boat, run the program you've run, know what you know. And then lastly, if you're coming from up north or California or somewhere where the temperatures don't get like what they do here in Texas, you're not used to hot and humid, your jetting is going to be way off. And so you need to understand that when it gets hot out, the air density drops. When it gets humid out, the amount of oxygen available to burn decreases, and water slows combustions, another little byproduct it has. And so at the end of the day, it requires jetting to be considerably leaner than if you live at SoCal, 60 degrees, beautiful on the beach, and get to go have an enjoyable life. So
Sure.
a lot of people show up to Loretta's like, you just don't run right. It ain't just right. And you hear it. I'm like, your bike's rich. I got the jetting. No offense to Greg at Lynx. He's a nice guy. And I think he does great work. He was recommending for a little while in these 125s jetting that was just so rich, they would sound terrible. And it was because for the early part of the year and where he was at, that was pretty close. But when you got to where it was hot and humid, and I swear, you could probably attest this, something about the air in that damn valley at Loretta's is just less quality. I mean, it's just not good. So the bikes generally end up quite a bit leaner than they would be if you were at cleaner, crisper, cooler air. And the other thing about Loretta's, I mean, last few years hasn't been that hot, but like sometimes it's hot from sun up to sundown. So you're not getting this cool breeze. You're not getting any of the cool air. And I feel like the bikes kind of create their own ecosystem out there, right? They're just hot. And so that's something to keep in mind too, is if you don't know anything about jetting, you need to hire a guy like me. If you do know something about jetting, you need to be prepared to be leaner than you've been, unless you live in the South like we do, Florida, Texas, Georgia, that kind of stuff, where you're used to 100-degree temperatures. Your bike's jetted, the fuel you're running, those types of things. So that's an excellent question. So yes, some of the fuels are actually worse that make horsepower. And you got to be very careful. Don't go to Loretta's and say, hey, I want the highest horsepower fuel I can get, and have never run that before. It will cause you headaches. Luckily, the 4-strokes are not so sensitive. So on those ones, yes, moisture ingress can be a problem, but typically on a fuel injected bike, they'll run through it. It'll run like a little bit of shit, and then it'll get all that water out of there, and then you're kind of okay. Or like the KTMs now, their fuel sump here's the bottom of the fuel level. Their pickup is up top. And so they're not going to suck water until the very, very, very end. And actually, they have maybe that was part of their design. They changed this design recently. They require fuel vapor to actually get to the bottom of the tank. You could run out of gas in a KTM with having gas in your tank. They don't actually have the fuel pickups in the gas. It's an amazing design. I don't know who thought of it. I never would have thought of it. But I think what happens is the fuel sloshes, it turns into vapor, and it condenses on their filter, which as a byproduct allows the water, which won't do that, to sit down in the bottom. So we actually drained a bike the other day. We're doing dyno testing, and there's some local 450 we got from a kid who just loves the ride, runs pump gas, right? And I'm draining it out to put race gas in the bike, and I'm pouring out pure gas. And then the last quarter of the gas tank was pure water. Like I could just see it turn color, and I'm like, oh, what is this? And the bike had been running perfectly in the dyno. Perfectly.
Yep.
And it pissed me off because I had like a 3/4 of a can of brand new pump gas that we'd gotten for testing, and I've just poured water all in it. And I'm like, son of a, like super pissed.
Yeah.
But he never noticed. And that's because that bike has that design. So it can kind of get away with some badness.
Now, you live in Texas. I'm in Florida. We've been talking a lot about Loretta's being super humid. What's the trick to storing gas the week of Loretta's to keep that water from absorbing?
Yeah, man, you're just full of great questions. So in my opinion, it should be in the metal can. It should be the least breathable can we have. It should be off the ground. Like without a doubt, don't set the metal can on the ground. That's true if you have a 55-gallon drum. It should be off the ground. And there's some good tips that people have done over the years. I know shops, like if I wanted to store fuel here, we used to sell 55-gallon drums of fuel or fuel out of it. You pick it up off the ground, you put it on a rack, and you have the one of the plugs is at fuel level. And so the air is like the hole where some moisture might want to go in and out is being clamped or covered by fuel. Those are things that you could do. Now, Loretta's, get a 5-gallon metal can, keep the fuel in there. There's no reason not to do that. They have the little spouts on them now, right? There's no need to put it into a plastic can nowadays. Keep it off the ground. You can keep it inside your camper, although I do not recommend it because of the smell and the wafting and the potentials of that. But just keep it out of the sunlight, right? You don't want it to be off gassing and this extreme heat. So try to do those things. And again, filter your darn gas. Get one of those. They sell them on Amazon. There's all, if you walk around the factory pits, you'll see every team do it. They have these funnels with the little like hairnet looking nylon filters. You can buy them a dime a dozen. They're like a K&N pre-filter that people use on snowmobiles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You put it on there, you pour your gas in there, and then like Amazon has some of those things that they can have a water filter too, where you'll pour the gas through this funnel, and the very bottom of the funnel doesn't allow the fuel into the tank. It allows the fuel in a little bit above it. It has like a riser so that any water will accumulate at the bottom. And then, yeah, you waste, a couple ounces of gas every time you fill it up, but you know that it's not going to have water. So to me, those are just a must do if you're really serious. Now, hey, you're not that serious? No big deal, right? But I promise you, there will be 10 motorcycles per class of Lorettas that go through fuel issues in every class this year in the two-stroke classes. I promise you. And some of them will figure it out, and some of them won't figure it out. And, unfortunately, you can be prepared or not be prepared. Let's ask you on your side. So I talk here forever. Human body recovery.
Yeah.
So we said the short term, the near term, the long term, the intermediate term. Talk to me about kind of those concepts. So what can you do? Like I had regionals just happened this weekend. And for the last couple weekends. So you just kicked your ass. You did the most 20-minute motos you've done in a long time. It's a long day. It was hot here in Texas, blah, 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 blah. What can you do immediately?
Well, the interesting part about this question is, and this what makes amateur motocross so incredibly difficult because, we've all been to races where you might have one or two motos in between 2 or 3 classes, right? And then you've got a 2-hour, 3-hour, 4-hour break, and then boom, 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 three motos almost back to back again. That's what I love about human performance because when you go pro, I'm not going to say easier. Obviously, going pro is difficult, but with the TV schedule, you know exactly when that gate's going to drop, and you know exactly when the second gate's going to drop. You know exactly when practice is going to start. You know exactly when practice is going to end. So from a nutritional timing standpoint, it's not very difficult at all. It's for the amateurs and the parents that are watching this show. The difficult part is your promoter going to start on time? Are they going to stick to the race order that they outlined? Because when I'm working with an athlete, and I do it with every one of our athletes, we say, hey, what is the tentative race order? What time do we think we're going to be hitting that first moto? Because then what you do is you go back from there and you get ready. We're talking today about recovery, but recovery is irrelevant if you haven't nailed preparation, right? So we're making an assumption that you nailed the timing of your nutrition, which is 2 hours, 2 hours from let's say your first gate drops at 9, your last square meal needs to be at 7. You need 2 hours to digest and purge. When you cross that finish line, stopwatch begins. You have what's called a glycogen synthase enzyme, which is most active for the first 10 to 15 minutes. So Derek, I put some programs in your hands and you'll notice that I say, as soon as you are finished with this workout, within 15 minutes, please digest, consume energy fuel. But the reason why we want you to take in the energy fuel is think about the 3 elements that you lose every single second that you're racing. Electrolytes, water, and you're burning calories. Replace the word calories with sugar. Because we race at such a high level heart rate wise, we're burning stored sugar, also known as glycogen. So that's why the recovery window, when the race is over, whether you won or whether you got dead last, you've got to push that aside and say, I've got another moto in 12 to 15 minutes if you're an amateur race. This is why if you're a parent listening to this and watching this on YouTube, this is why we tease Derek. This is why athletes will start with a bang and end with a fizzle, because they start with their gas tank filled, and then each moto, they kind of start getting behind. You get to the third moto, now they're really dug themselves into a hole. Now we've got a long 2 to 3 hour break, and they got to be ready to come back at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and race at 3, 3:20, and 4 o'clock. The parents are like, where did my athlete go? Yes, you could argue the track went away. You could argue it got a little bit hotter. You could say all kinds of things about the conditions. But when you're looking at the subject of recovery, you've got to think about it hour by hour. When you're done for the day, you got to be ready to start recovering. And this is what's hard, Derek. You and I've talked about this off the record about Lorettas. For a lot of these kids, they get to see some of their friends once a year, and this is it. So when the race is over, win, lose, or draw, right? Most of the young kids are like, yeah, maybe I had a really good race, euphoria. Maybe I had a shit race, sadness. But most of the kids, they're okay. They just want to go hang out with their buddies. So what happens is now they get done racing, they go and expose themselves to that heat and humidity that you're just referencing. Like you said, in the foothills there's not a lot of cross winds that come through. So the air becomes very, very stagnant. It's very warm. And this is what makes athletes want to go jump in the river. And the river is good for getting your core temperature down for just a short period of time. But you've got to remember, when you go into that river, your body, the number one response of a human being in something that's colder than it is, your body will try to heat that body of water. So now you've got an athlete that just raced on Tuesday, whatever time during the day. They go and they lay in that river. You don't realize how much energy the body's giving, trying to warm the river up. Derek, I've said this before. For anybody who's listening and has heard it before, I apologize. It's redundant. If you're in the middle of the winter and your car slides off the road and you go into a frozen lake, your body is trying to warm the lake that you just fell into. Obviously, you lose the battle and you die of hypothermia. Now, the river isn't quite as cold as a frozen lake, but if you've ever jumped in that river, it's pretty chilly. So what you're doing is you're negatively impacting your ability to recover in between motos. Like I said, I know
even though you might think you're not, but it turns out that you are. So you can,
well, you get in there for a few minutes to get your core temperature down, but you don't sit in there for hours on end, because if we were to, like, hypothetically speaking, if you had an energy gauge, when you're in there and you start getting goosebumps and you start shivering a little bit, if there's ever any, there's not a lot of wind that blows through there, but sometimes you'll feel a little bit of a crosswind if you're over by the river, because it's a little bit, it's kind of away from where the track is at. Well, if you start getting goosebumps, you got to realize you're losing energy. Your body's shivering, trying to create heat. And now, I'm going to sound a little bit sarcastic. So for all the listeners, please take this tongue in cheek. I do find it interesting that athletes, parents, facility trainers make a big deal about racing at Loretta's. You're racing one moto for 20 minutes per day.
Yeah, it shouldn't be that hard.
My athletes' warm-ups are longer than the length of the moto, right? My athletes warm up for about 30 minutes, give or take, depending what the main set is. So even those days that you have two motos, it's not like it's at 9 and 10. It's at like 9 and 4. You've got plenty of time.
We talk about the bike and, early on. Most people early on in the sport, their kids will go ride multiple hours when they're new to the sport. They may not ride at the intensity level and the speed that they do later. So it's funny how they devolve from your kid totally capable of running your 5-gallon gas can out of gas on a 65. So 5 hours of riding, to hey, he's going to Loretta's. He's, in the top 40 in the country and he can't do 2 20-minute motos in a day. What?
Yep.
Something went backwards here. Back in the day, your kid could go ride all day. Now, again, the intensity, whatever, but you got to keep that perspective. Like you said, Loretta's really should be the easiest thing you do. Now, I get it. You gas out 2-3 laps to go. You just didn't quite have that ability. That's okay. It's not our goal, right? Your goal is to make it all the way through. But the point is, if you're like, oh, I can't possibly do a second one today, what are you doing? 2 20-minute motos in a day is the regional is going to kick your ass if you can't do that, right? So
well, there's a lot to unpack on what you just said right there, and I think it's worth taking a few minutes to discuss, especially for the dads. When we're talking over on the vet show, and we're talking about, hey, you need to warm up, and the typical vet will be like, man, if I warm up, I'm going to be too tired to race. I understand that's a fitness issue. Your schedule is pretty darn busy, and it's hard to get it all in. When we're dealing with amateurs, right? When did we transition into, we love riding dirt bikes, to now we swing a leg over and we're always training? To your point, exactly. When it was just a fun, let's go ride our dirt bikes, nobody complained about being tired. Now, the reason why there's so much to unpack here is now you're going and you're racing. You made a comment that really, it's a point of contention for me. My athlete knows that when they go to Loretta's, they can do a 40-minute moto and not get tired. Yes, a 40-minute moto. It's called a 2-to-1 ratio, right? When an athlete, let's say, I'll just take blame and say it's one of my athletes. If one of my athletes goes backwards at Loretta's, all that tells me is they went past their anaerobic threshold. It's not a big fancy word. While you're listening to the show, the amount of oxygen in your blood allows you to meet the muscular demands. Pretty simple, right? There's enough oxygen in the blood, you're aerobic. If you were to hit pause on this show and you were to run around your office, or you were to run around your building, or you were to run around your house as fast as you can, the muscular demands supersedes the amount of oxygen that's in the blood. You cross that line, you become anaerobic. You're working in an environment with a lack of sufficient amount of oxygen. If my athlete comes off the track, and I don't want to give away all of our secrets, but the goal is to always finish the race stronger than we started, plain and simple. Well, If my athlete on lap number 3 of a 10-lap race is gone, let's just say their anaerobic threshold is 185 on the heart rate, very loose number, I'm just pulling. Well, if you hit 185 on lap number 3, you as an athlete will go backwards. Plain and simple. We are mammals. We have to have oxygen in our blood. So as dumb as that sounds while you're sitting here listening to this, if your athlete starts to go backwards on race day, now again, it's just like a motor. Why is a motor starting to spit and sputter? Could be gas, could be electrical, could be this, it could be that, it could be a multitude of things. Well, with the human body, you've got to deductively reason the exact same thing. Why would your athlete go backwards? Very first thing that we look at is average heart rate. If you know your anaerobic threshold is 185 and on lap number 2, they're sitting at 183, they went across that threshold. Unfortunately, with the human body is the body, and I hope moto dads do not get irritated when I say this, you're getting frustrated with an athlete who is a mammal, who goes anaerobic. The body's going to slow down until it gets enough oxygen in the muscle, into the blood to meet the muscular demand before your athlete's going to be able to resume. So think about this. If your athlete, I'll continue to use the 185 heart rate. And if you're not training with a Garmin heart rate monitor, I would encourage you to do so because knowledge is power. If your athlete is sitting there on lap number 2 at Loretta's and he or she is sitting at 183 and they stall the bike, they put the bike down and we're assuming we're on 2 strokes and they have to kickstart it, right? As soon as they start kicking, their heart rate goes from 182 to 190 and then they're able to get the bike started. They're not going to be able to resume the 2-minute lap time that they were holding before they put the bike down. They're going to go 208s to 215s because they've gone to the point of anaerobic threshold. There's not enough oxygen in the blood. So the body is going to purposely slow it down. It's a self-defense mechanism. Your body is not going to let you race a motorcycle to the point that you die of asphyxiation of not having enough oxygen in the blood.
Right.
So that's what makes this so fascinating is you want to make sure that you as an athlete, you as a dad, dad or mom, making sure that your athlete is fit enough to go a 35 to 40 minute moto, and they know what intensity they can maintain without going anaerobic. I received a text message literally today that said, how should I get my athlete acclimated to the heat? And the good old dreaded sweatshirt came out. If you want to put your son or daughter into full-blown heat stroke, have them ride a motorcycle with a sweater, sweatshirt, sweater, whatever you want to call it. Because all you've done is you've insulated heat, and the body is not designed to do that. It's like you telling me that you want to acclimate your motor to getting used to being in the heat by packing the radiators with mud and covering the motor with mud. Because if the motor can't get that exothermic process, if it can't get that internal heat out and wicked away, the bike overheats and loses power. Human body's the same way.
Now, is there any acclimation process? I believe there is.
Sure.
But because I grew up here, I rode here in Texas, and when I got full blast, I think it's a fitness thing too, right? You have to be fit, but I was able to put down 30+ minute motos in Texas, 100+ degree temperatures when it's humid. Back when I was, really rolling and rocking, it took a long time to get there. Like that was not easy. You know what I mean? But I could say for sure, like the first couple hot days of the year, when you're coming out of a nice weather, it's like, oh man, like this is this is a shock. But so for people who are not in the heat, is there a way to acclimate? Meaning like they, or is it just a little bit of like, hey, you just have to be fit enough and then know your numbers?
Well, it's going to be a combination of those two. Number one, the fitter you are, the less body fat you have. So that fat becomes a heat blanket and it makes it more difficult to get heat to the skin and get it wicked away. So that's a challenge in itself. So yes, fitness is always going to play a significant role in that. When it comes to that, the key word that you just brought up there is acclimatization. Are you trying to acclimatize to the heat or are you trying to perform in the heat? Two completely different subjects.
Right.
If I'm from somewhere in the country where relatively humidity is low, then I'm trying to go someplace to get acclimated to heat and humidity. I'm not trying to insult anyone's science skills. Humidity is simply a number that measures the volume of water in the air. Water in the air, humidity, cannot allow and will not allow sweat, another molecule of water, to evaporate. Water against water will not evaporate. So that's why we call it a heat blanket. And position blanket.
I can give you a little more science on that, which we talked about, I think, on the show.
Yep.
But it has to do with jetting. Like it's funny that engines and the human body share the same fundamental processes. They just do it differently. But yeah, so the term, when you say, oh yeah, it's humid out today, we use the term relative humidity in all of our weather reports. But that is exactly the right word, because if the relative humidity is 90 or 100%, if it's 100%, the air cannot accept more water. It's physically impossible. You can sweat all you want. It will not go into the air. And that's fairly true if it's like high 80s and 90s, and it doesn't have the capacity to accept more water. That's why if you live in a dry climate and relative humidity is like 0, 10, 20, 30%, you're like, man, I never sweat. Because when you sweat, it's immediately absorbed by the air because it has the capacity. So like you said, when you have a lot of humidity in the air, it's harder to rid yourself of heat, because that process, when water evaporates, it's a latent heat of evaporation. When the fuels do the same thing to make horsepower, they pull heat away. So yes, when it's more humid out, you are going to cook, relatively speaking, versus when it's not humid out, 100%. And that's what the term relative humidity means.
And this is why your question was so on point, because if you're telling me that you're going to go somewhere and get acclimatized to the heat and humidity, you don't drive through the night for 2 days, 3 days, come from California, end up in Texas or Florida, and get out and start grinding 20-minute motos. See, this is the problem that we run into, is you've gone from low relative humidity to high levels of humidity. You're telling yourself that you've got to get acclimatized, but you're not acclimatizing. You acclimatize by going on day number 1 and you go sit underneath a shade tree. It's hot, it's humid. I'm not trying to insult anyone's math or science skills here, but the air temperature is the same in the shade as it is in the sun. The temperature is the same. It's the UV rays that makes it feel warmer than it is. But if you're measuring temperature, if you put a temperature gauge under the tree and you put a temperature gauge in the middle of the driveway, it's the same temperature.
And I know a lot of people struggle with that, but you're 100% correct. It's the UV will heat you up as well. That's a different form of energy. Yeah.
And that's the hard part, is we're out there, right? It's not like we're underneath the trees when we're out on the racetrack for most facilities. So what ends up happening is, if you're telling me that you're trying to get acclimated to the heat, day 1, day 2, go sit in the shade in a pair of shorts, no shirt on. And the body's going to, you'll sleep like a baby that night, because you're going to be feeling heat. I don't like to use the word exhaustion. I think that's overused. Heat fatigue is legit. Right? So
I bet you would know this, but your Garmin comments, it probably picks up on this. If you went out and just sat in the heat and you weren't used to it, you would see a stress level to go up.
You will get the stress level to go up, because Garmin's smart enough. It's looking, when your body is exposed to sun stress, heart rate's going to go up as a byproduct, which is an external indicator of an internal stress.
Right.
And then it will pick it up on your stress score. And just like your motorcycle, if you put it on the stand and you let it idle for 8 hours, you come back, there's less fuel in it, right? Because it just sits and burns calories.
Right.
Well, think about it. If the motorcycle doesn't have a fan blowing on the motor, think about just that concentrated heat that's now localized. We need that air. Derek, I'm going to show my age for the moto dads, right? Remember big old Mako 490s, YZ 465s, 490s. They put those big air scoops underneath, just trying to funnel as much air to those big cylinder heads that we could possibly. I mean, open bikes didn't even crank up until it was like 30 seconds to go racing, because they knew they were going to lose so much power.
Right.
So you think about like an 81 465 or something, right? Besides vibrating your hands off and the kickback would throw you over the handlebars, it was all about preserving heat. So when you're sitting there, because I want to stay on the subject of acclimatizing yourself, then do that for a day or two, and then go and sit directly in the sun for 15, 20 minutes. Watch how you start to sweat a lot more in direct sunlight. And now, again, how many of our listeners have the luxury of saying, hey, I think I'll go acclimatize for 14 days in the heat and humidity before I go to a hot, humid race? It's not very realistic. What is interesting is, if you look at our professional cyclists, our professional runners, and our professional triathletes, this is exactly what they do.
Well, on the flip side of this, though, and I'm going to interject here, we talked so much about this in the past. So if you're new to the show, go catch up, or we'll touch on it. But basically, acclimatizing is not sending your kid to some Texas or Florida or Georgia training facility 2 weeks before and saying, all right, go pound 25s as hard as you can right before Lorettas, because what's that going to do?
Yep. Well, and this is where, again, we've spoken about this previously, and I do like your point. If you're new to the show, welcome. But for those who have been with us, we have to keep the knowledge rolling forward. So if we say anything that's confusing, we've got 16 previous shows. Please go back and listen to them. We talked about all these subjects separately. We want to make sure every time we put a show together, it's the next level of knowledge. When we're looking at the idea of getting acclimated to the heat, 7 to 10, 14 days is a perfect number. Again, I know not all of our listeners have that luxury, but let's play devil's advocate. If I can say to you physiologically, let's just call it the magic numbers 10 to 14 days, and you don't have that luxury, well, think about the opposite. If you go from a low relative humidity environment, come down and you drop yourself into a hot, humid environment and decide that you're going to try to smash out a 20-minute moto at race pace, you're going to get bit. You're going to get bit very, very hard. And my phone rings off the hook the week after Loretta's because you'll have the parent that says, my son or daughter was in great physical shape. Skill set was great. We're working with a great riding coach and we fell apart at Loretta's. Did you really? Did you really fall apart or did you just succumb to hot, humid conditions that you weren't acclimated to? Because I'm going to sound like a hypocrite here. I said a few minutes ago, I find it interesting that people go to Loretta's and say that they can't race for 20 minutes without succumbing to heat and humidity. Well, let's put a little bit more context. Is your little Johnny and Susie, are they out in the heat all day long? I just tease you. If you go sit underneath a shade tree for 6 hours and the relative humidity is 95 to 100%, ambient air temperatures in the 90s, you're going to be very, very tired at the end of the day. That is heat-related fatigue, not exhaustion, just fatigue. Well, now your little Johnny and Susie are running around. They're in and out of the golf cart. Well, yeah, golf cart, because you can't have pit bikes anymore. You're doing all this stuff. Well, you're in that heat and humidity. You're exposed in and out of the UV rays. Your racer athlete is losing energy day over day over day over day over day.
And you've mentioned like with the Garmin stuff, the body battery thing, your goal is to have them be charged up all week. I can say from experience that mine gets to 0 by the end of the week, right? I'm not getting enough rest. I'm not doing the things I need to do. And so, I guarantee you that most of these families, if they were to use that type of technology and learn how to understand it, would probably be going the wrong way during the week. And, I would say from my experience, the only way to charge it up is to rest.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, it's just a mathematical number, right? You can't sit in the sun, heat, humidity, UV, skin sweating, losing water, losing electrolytes, and expect the body to be able to rejuvenate itself day over day over day.
Right.
Now, there's a lot to, again, chew on here. I understand for a lot of the young athletes, they only get to see these friends once a year. But as you said, you might be spending $20,000 to $50,000 to get there. And then between getting there and the week of the race, sorry, little Johnny and Susie, maybe, fly their friend out. It'd be a little bit cheaper. You're there to go race.
Yeah. And I agree. Like if you're like, hey, we're 20th, we're over 20th. This is a life experience for us. We just love to go. Hey, that's
totally
fine.
Get it.
Yep, that's fine.
Totally get it.
If you're legitimately trying to get the best result for yourself, become a contender, go up front, be successful. I'm sorry. You have to do something, differently. And you probably could attest this. I don't typically see Loretta's winners out and about very much.
No,
they're sitting in the trailer.
And
a lot of them get cabins away now, right?
Yeah.
They don't even stay on site anymore.
Well, and that's what makes it a catch-22, because when an athlete's parents will call me and say, I don't know what happened. Well, you do know what happened. It was just subtle. You don't realize, and that's where the Garmin, like you say, it starts to bring to the attention the subtleties: high heart rate, high stress level, elevated sweat rate. Every time.
And you have, I forget about that. I forgot to bet this up the other day. You have sweat rate monitoring technologies. Like how cool is that?
Well, again, it's kind of like in the cycling world. A lot of guys train with power, but don't know how to interpret the data. You have a lot of people that buy Garmins and Whoops and Polars and all these other devices. When we're talking about the idea of getting acclimated to the heat versus performing in the heat, two different stories. And then when you're looking at an athlete, particularly parents that have sent their kids to facilities, they're riding at the facilities better than they ever have, best times, consistency, everything is there. And then over 6 days, they become a puddle. Well, the difference is we got to be very careful. And I'm not because you're a motor builder, but it's like when a motor builder gets blamed because you make a warning and say, hey, look, I know this is a brand new bike. I want to let you know what I've seen for the last year on this new model that's come out. I'm just going to use valves, right? We know that these valves, this is a problem. The chain stretches. What I would recommend is that you just go ahead and replenish. I know it's a brand new bike, but I've seen these things go bad. You bought this bike just for Loretta's. They go, no, we're okay. We'll take the risk. Well, then the bike grenades. Well, is that the motor builder's fault?
And
the motor builder
told
you that that's a historical problem that they've seen for 6 months. You chose not to do it. When an athlete says, and like I said to you earlier, I've just received a text message today, should my little Johnny train in a sweatshirt? only if you want to kill your child.
Right.
And I say that as serious as I could possibly say that, because and again, there's going to be people who grew up in the wrestling world and they wore the sweatsuits, like those silver ones that retain water. I don't care what you did. If you're asking me if it's healthy, the answer is no today, as it was 25 years ago, but it doesn't mean people don't still keep doing it. So what we're trying to really shed light on is anyone that's listening to this show is trying to get the truth. Well, the truth is, if you expose your son or daughter to a lot of external heat, they're only going to be excessively fatigued. That is not a lack of fitness. Now, it could be. My athletes, we know it's not because we do testing. Literally, we started training for Loretta's last October. We trained right through Mini-O's. We trained right through Daytona. We trained right through Spring Nationals for those that care about Loretta's.
Well, and on your point, I would say the sweatshirt thing, if you live in, like, I lived in Boston for a while, it doesn't get hot there, like compared to Texas, right? I moved up there and I'm like, the hottest day of the year was like a breeze, like was nice to me. I'm like, this is finally warm enough. I'm not cold all the time, In that environment, you needed to get some heat training in. You probably, and I'm not, you're the trainer, but you could probably say, hey, dude, it's at the high of 80 today. It's low humidity, and I want to put a sweatshirt on and go do a 15-minute jumping jack workout. I probably could get away with it with the knowledge of, hey, I need to keep an eye on myself though. I need to have a friend who keeps an eye on myself to make sure that I'm not overdoing it or I'm getting, heat exhaustion, whatever. But on the flip side of that, here in Texas, it'd be a death wish, right? Like you'd be like, that's the stupidest thing you could ever do. On the flip, and you know what I mean? Like it's 90 degrees, not right. Lately we've been lucky, but most of the time in the summer, it's 90 degrees when you wake up, and it's 90 degrees when you go to bed or at 11 o'clock at night, and it only gets worse from there. And it's humid and it's hot, right? That would just be not smart. And then, like you said, what are we really acclimating? Well, I got off topic there, but I was going to say, I learned through cycling, and that's why I love when you do off the bike type training programs you talk about. I could track my power versus ambient temperature, and it decreases the hotter it gets outside. And you can go into there's science behind that. That's a fact. There's nothing you can do from a physiological standpoint to change that. It's no different than your dirt bike engine. If it's 200 degrees outside, your dirt bike engine would have to be derated to survive. It's just how it's going to, what it is. So, but you have to learn that through the experience, like going on the road cycle. Okay, today I can't hit the numbers that I hit when it's 50 degrees outside. So like the same applied on the dirt bike. When it was 50 or 60 out, I could ride like there was no tomorrow and my fitness was high. I could not get tired. But on the flip side, when it's 100 degrees outside, I had to meter my output. Like, okay, my heart rate numbers are there. I don't feel like I'm pushing as hard, but my heart rate numbers are saying I cannot go harder than this, or I will do what you said, which is go anaerobic.
Well, here's where I'll politely disagree with what you mentioned about being in Minnesota using the sweatshirt. And you just said it there in your last comment. You kept mentioning air temperature not paying regards to the humidity.
Right.
Because the temperature isn't what's going to smoke you. You said it earlier. In a relatively low humidity, relative humidity is low. The body's able to wick away that moisture of sweat, which cools the body down. Just because you're wearing a sweatshirt doesn't make the environment more humid. You're increasing the core body temperature, but you're not adjusting to the humidity. Now, if we want to get super highly technical, right? If you could put yourself into an environment where you could go and literally, let's just say you could take your stationary bike, trainer, rower, whatever you're going to do, and you go and you spend some time in an environment where you could adjust the humidity and get it to 100%. Now, again, I would highly recommend that you have a very, very high velocity fan blowing on you.
Right.
But what you want to do is just simply, instead of going to 20, like if you're trying to get ready to do a 20-minute moto, I would do 2 10-minute motos with a 10-minute rest in nice, cool temperatures. So you expose yourself to the heat, go cool off, come back, do another 20. Now, again, who's got the luxury to go set the rower up in a sauna?
Right.
Now, there are people that do it.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I've got professional triathletes that they'll set their whole Wahoo kicker up in a sauna.
Right.
But what you have to be careful of, and this is where we have to kind of roll this entire conversation backwards. We, as a company, Complete Racing Solutions, we do not work on heat acclimatization if the athlete's already showing pre-existing fatigue. Now think about the average parent, right? They're chasing the areas, they chase the regionals, they've now got 7 to 8 weeks to get ready. You're not bringing an absolutely preseason fresh athlete into that acclimatization stage. Now, I'm going to kind of talk some of the parents off of a very tall shelf here. This is why your athlete shits the bed when they go to Loretta's. Because you've again, I say this politely, you've been approaching the year completely wrong. I hate to say that. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. If your son or daughter is working with a trainer or they're at a facility and they're just going sprint work, sprint work, sprint work, sprint work, and they've been doing that since last, Loretta's was over in August. Hopefully you took a couple weeks off. Most parents don't because they have all this speed and fitness. And they're like, we don't want to lose it. So now you've been going balls to the wall since last year after Loretta's. Now here we sit. Your athlete's been going almost a full year, not taking any time off when they should have done the opposite. Pump the brakes, enjoy some downtime, do a very, very important, this is the most important part of the year that everybody overlooks is preseason. You have to build a base of strength and you build an aerobic engine. That aerobic engine that you build in November, December, January is what carries you in Loretta's in August. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the athletes that have been doing speed work all the way up to and including your regional, you will not build the aerobic engine necessary in June and July to get ready for Loretta's.
Well, the worst comment you could hear is, "Oh, we made Loretta's. Let's get after it harder now."
Yep.
And it's like,
Well, I am gonna spill a little bit of our little Coca-Cola syrup. Our athletes are doing the exact opposite.
right. And we talked about it on the show. So it's a lot of insight here. And I've learned a lot, right? Getting to see here and absorb. And unfortunately, I mean, how many parents are doing that right now? Pretty much every single one who qualified for the first time of their life, right? They're like, oh, we made it. I mean, regionals just happened here in Texas. So I'm like, we posted some pictures and some guys and whatever. And it's like, you hear that comment every time. Oh man, we made it. Now we're going to up our training. We're going to up our volume. And it's like, dude, probably need to go the other way. And then what is Loretta's out? 2 months, not even 2 months out, a month and a half, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's at the time of this drop, it's going to be about 7 weeks, but
I'll say, so how, on this, by the time this drops, it'll probably be less than that, right?
4 weeks. Yep.
So the point is though, from a human physiological standpoint, how much fitness could I gain in a month and a half?
None. You can only fatigue yourself to the point, and this is where the parents get so irritated. No fault of your own. It's just lack of knowledge. That's why we wanted to put this show together to, help parents make better decisions to go the distance. You cannot gain any significant fitness in the next 2 to 3 weeks, but you can certainly lose a lot of the speed and endurance that you have by coming in tired. We've talked about it before. You and I, we go and buy a brand new bike and I only ride it in second gear, and I go to a track like Millville. It's got a lot of elevation, and I only ride it in second gear and I grind out 4 20-minute motos. Yeah. On the hour meter, it's got 80 minutes, but the stress underneath the hood's a lot more than if I'd used the gears the way they were intended. And I want the parents to really stop and think about this. If your trainer, your facility trainer, wherever you're at, if they're telling you you've got to put this grind in, you're a day late and $1 short.
Oh, and to kind of, from my perspective, to bet parents understand something here is, you go do his grind and you say, hey, but my kid's getting better. He's able to go longer in the motos. I can tell it's working. It's like he's getting more efficient at riding his motorcycle because you're letting them ride more. But that's also a comfortability thing. And what I mean by that is, on a track he knows, at a facility he knows, under an environment and schedule he knows. With, for example, once you get used to a dirt, it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you just throw a wrench in all of that at a new location, against new competition, new dirt, different terrains, all constantly altering levels of wetness, which is Loretta's, right? All these factors. And all of a sudden he's like, oh, he's tired. Well, if you go back to the 6 weeks prior to Loretta's, where you first started kicking up your program and you're like, well, his first day was really rough. You're just going to go back to that at Loretta's. Your fitness level, like you said, will not grow from now till Loretta's. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. Your comfortability, maybe your efficiency, that's what riding really does, right? A lot of riding increases your ability to ride at less effort if you want. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, you throw a wrench in that program and change the track up, the dirt up, the competition up, the level up, the intensity up, and all of a sudden that comfortability goes right out the window and your kid's tired again.
Yeah. All we're doing with our athletes during the months of June and July, making sure that setup is as balanced and as comfortable as they can get. The 85 riders are 65 riders grow quickly, but it seems like the 85 riders grow the most. It's a very interesting statistic behind the scene. The suspension settings that you have at the beginning of June could be completely different, including even the springs themselves by the time you get to Loretta's, because your athlete is growing. I mean, they forget that they're an elite racer. They're just simply growing. And I've seen so many people, they're like, yep, we've got our settings in June. I go, no, you don't. You're not even remotely close to your settings. So you have to remember, the most important thing is to go into Loretta's literally riding the bike the week before, not training, working on getting the bike set up and balanced, because you're never going to ride your ability if you're jockeying with a motorcycle. If you're wrestling the motorcycle, I'm never going to see your fitness ever. The perfect day, and we've said this before, Derek, the perfect day for me as a physiologist is I know that you're comfortable on the bike and you ride that bike to its 100% potential. And then when that bike attacks the track and the track serves the athlete back, right? Because the energy's got to go somewhere, it goes back to the athlete. When he or she rides that bike to its potential against the demands of the track, win, lose, or draw, I don't care what the finished place is. My goal, and all my athletes know this, and if you follow me on social media, you'll see that I post this all the time. What I look for is consistency. I don't care if you're consistently ninth. We have to start somewhere. What I care about is, can you give me 5 laps where you're less than 1 second? At Loretta's, I'm looking for 10 laps, no more than a 2-second deviation. That's it.
And I'll give the
That's all we
sport some
look for.
credit. The regionals have gone to a longer moto format, and I do like it in many regards. However, it has changed the game a little bit if you're a C-class parent. Really, it's the only class that matters per se, because there's 5 of them. So are you going to enter 3 moto format 20-minute motos for the whole weekend? And can you sustain that moto? Most kids cannot. But I do like the fact that it's giving you a precursor. If your kid faded at the regional, which all of them did, I look at lap times, right? I followed all the regionals. Pretty much every kid, and except for some of these title kids, they're falling, and they're falling off 4 to 5 seconds a lap near the end of the race. Now, sometimes that's smart. All right, I can't get the guy in front of me, and it's the last lap, and that guy behind me is not getting me. That's acceptable to me, right? But if you're seeing like a consistent lap, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just a consistent fade.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, granted, there's some intelligence there. You got to get top 6, and okay, I can't get the guy. I held my position. I'm riding the pace I need to ride. I get it. But if your like kid needed that moto and he put it all out there in the line and you see that fade, I promise you that fade will be there at Loretta's. I don't care what you do from now till then, because like you said, the work was not done early enough in the year. So I always say to parents, and I think we need, the show is geared towards having success in amateur nationals, all of them, Loretta's being the big one.
Yeah.
But the problem is the regional is your big, for Loretta's in particular, the regional is your biggest race of the year. That actually needs to be the date that you circle on your calendar and say, I need to have my bikes ready. I need to have my athlete ready. I need to have our prep and our program ready. And the problem is most people circle Loretta's on their calendar and then they show up unprepared at the regional. And then a lot of times, like I said, you're too late by the time the regional happened. So all of the, and then like you said here, what are your athletes doing? Well, you've set aside the time from now to Loretta's to do things that are a little bit different than what other people are doing. And that little bit of difference is important.
Well, I will say we're doing the exact opposite of what everybody's doing.
Right.
Yes, we're doing some fast motos, but not for 20 minutes. If you recognize the idea that we're trying to shed fatigue, you're not stacking volume. This is the wrong time to be stacking volume. And for those of you that are kind enough to follow this program and listen to what we have to say, you'd be surprised how many people that are lined up on the gate are coming to the race exhausted, heat exhausted. And I don't even like to use the word exhausted as I tease, excessively fatigued associated with heat. Another area is way undernourished. We've seen some kids on 65s, and a lot of parents scoff at the idea of thinking that a young athlete on a 65 could burn 5,000 calories. If I shared with you our Garmin dashboards, I would say 99% of the kids are burning 35 to 5,000 calories on a 65. If you look at an 85 rider, they're burning 5,000 to 6,000 calories. Now people will, there's no way. I'm like, great, that's cool. My clients know it, and they're eating enough food to bridge that calorie gap. Every day that your athlete is not bridging that calorie gap, my athlete is systematically walking away from your athlete. I don't say it arrogantly. The numbers don't lie. I don't make the numbers up. So what we've been working on with our athletes all year long, what foods can you put together that can, because the subject of today is about recovery, right? So what foods should you eat in between each moto? What do you eat day after day? Because they'll say that we're talking hour over hour. That's why we created energy fuel. You don't want to put solid foods in your stomach because it's too much to break down.
I meant to ask you that when you were talking about that. Post-moto, you said right away. And there's all the data in the world on that.
Liquid calories.
Right?
All liquid calories.
What, like, let's say you have a 7 o'clock moto in Loretta's, the first moto of the week of the day.
Yeah.
Realistically, you got to be up early, right? Yeah.
You have to have breakfast done by 5.
So there's no wake your kid up at 6:30 and say, get on the bike and go to the line. And a lot of families do that. It drives me. I'm like, and then the crazy part is, I think they've made small tweaks in the program, but Loretta's has had almost the same moto program going back forever. You already know when you're going to race. Go look at last year.
Exactly. Yep.
So you should be, like, for example, I mean, most people would prepare this, right? Like if your kid has a 7 o'clock moto, probably odds are right now you need to be waking his ass up at 5, getting him in.
You need to be getting him up at 4:30, breakfast is done by 5. Now you can go back to sleep and sleep from 5 to 6,
Right.
but in regards to giving the body the nutrition it needs, not to get rude, but you've got to digest and purge, right? The body will extract what it needs and wants, and it will purge what it doesn't need and want. Well, this is one of the reasons why we end up with athletes who say, oh, or parents will tell me that their athlete can't eat on race day. Well, that's because stress, heat, high heart rate, and ironically, humidity, all of those will suppress appetite. So, and Derek, I have a little bit of a demented sense of humor. What blows my mind is how much money is spent to get to Loretta's. And inevitably, your son's going to come in tied 2-1 on Saturday, has a 7, 8 a.m. And because he hasn't been practicing getting up and eating breakfast, literally, no pun intended, shits the bed because he doesn't eat calories. He's eating dinner at 6 o'clock. He's gone from 6 p to 6 a.m. There's 12. Now we're on the gate at 8. So now he's 14 hours with no calories because he hasn't up.
Well, you cram down some food at 6:15, and he's cramping and feeling like shit,
Going up in the
down, and right, he doesn't feel comfortable. And then on top of that, your bodily schedule, like we all have our morning routine, and when our body does things, well, if you change that program up, it throws you off. So,
well, and this is what's disappointing to me because you have parents that spend all the time and energy, go in tied 2-1 on Saturday, and something that was so easy to essentially to perfect becomes the simple element that undermines the entire week. So they go 1, 2, 17.
right.
Because I've had athletes that have thrown up in their helmet and they'll call me and they're like, Rob, they weren't working with me when they threw up in their helmet. They throw away a 2-1 tied for Saturday and they go, what happened? Why did my athlete throw up in their helmet? And we just simply ask, when was the last meal? Oh, they had something, to your point, 6:30. What'd they have? Well, they took down a breakfast burrito. Okay, have they ever eaten that before race? No. Okay, well, that was your first mistake. Second of all, you didn't eat it within that 2-hour window. Second mistake. Being very blunt, when you bring the heart rate up, the body's only concern is not die of a heat stroke. So it is going to purge what it doesn't need or want. So it's either going to regurgitate it or it's going to go through your bottom end.
And how many parents this past weekend at the regionals do you think were immediately off the track, taking in liquid calories, hydration, electrolytes, right? And some of these parents were right. They say my kids eat clean. They do that. They might, but you know what? Sometimes your version of clean may not be digestible within this next 30-minute window or 40-minute window. Like the earliest turnaround time you would have, feasibly at a regional, would be a little over 25 minutes. Let's call it gate drop, or 20 minutes, right? Now, typically they'll jitter a little bit, but it's possible. You have 20 minutes. Hey, you gotta do it right. And that I didn't know all this stuff, right? I didn't know any of this stuff. So I think that's
nutrition
huge.
3 ways. You have quality. You said eating clean. You have quantity. The Garmin is helping you know what your burn rate is. And you have to look at timing, nutritional timing. That's what allows our athletes to have a distinct advantage when we go to any race, particularly at Loretta's, because there's a lot of eggs in that basket there. And that's the part, that's why I love putting this show together, is when we talk about it, we talk about even bigger elements. When an athlete is rested, they have thicker muscles, they're resilient to injury. When they eat and they sleep and they recover properly, the tendons and ligaments more resilient, thicker, more resilient to
Well,
injury.
that's that 1% every day, right? If you get the right program, you can be stronger, fitter, safer, longer, but it doesn't start 1.5 months before Loretta's, unfortunately.
Well, and that's the part that kills me with these facilities. And don't get me wrong. I've got great relationships with Ben Riddle at Sandbox and Daniel Blair at Club and JP Money at Next Level and Ian over at Cycle Ranch. I mean, Jamie Hunkler up in the New England area. I've got great relationships with all these facilities and stuff like that. But if it wasn't for those facilities being willing to listen and try to incorporate these things, let's face it, the parents are paying money to get results. And my job is not to say whether your training program, let's say you're a full-time facility and they require you to do their on-site fitness program. I'm not here to critique it. What I'm trying to show you as a parent is, what is your athlete doing? Is it working? Because like you said earlier, you're either getting better or you're not. There is no middle ground. This is a big farce that's out there. There's no such thing in the physical world on a daily basis. There is no plateau. I hate to bust people's bubble on that one. On a daily basis, your body's either getting bigger and stronger, anabolic, it's growing, or it's in a catabolic teardown mode. There is no plateau. Now, people will sit and argue this all day long, but it's a scientific fact. It's just like think about this. This is where we get kind of into some very deep conversations. At what point A baby is born today. At what point does he go from growing to aging? Nobody can answer that question.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? I was ask you to the parents. I meant to say like the facilities. One thing you have to understand is this is America. Everything's for hire, right? And everybody, even if I'm not motivated to make $1 million every week, or right, like if my motivation wasn't money, I still have bills to pay and things that need to get paid, right? Just to survive, to be in business. Everybody has a base minimum cost. These facilities are no different, and their busiest time of the year, without fail, is from now until Loretta's, because all these families have school off and they get gung ho. So they're going to accept you with open arms and they're going to do their best with the time given to try to make you better. The problem is that's an almost insurmountable task. If I told you, hey, Rob, I'd like you to make me an Olympic athlete in triathlon and I have a month and a half to do it,
Exactly.
you'd be like, sorry, Derek. Even if I'm a fairly well-trained athlete, right?
Right.
Like, hey, you're pretty fit, but it's not going to happen in a month and a half. It'd be like taking Lance Armstrong today as he sits and saying, hey, month and a half, go race the tour. Like,
well, think about when we go to Loretta's, like take the results from last year. I've got a couple of champions from last year and a lot of top fives from last year. We didn't sit on our laurels, but stop and think about this. We did pull the parachute. We took 4 weeks off. We did put together a very, very specific off season. We did, and this where working with the parents is very important because with a lot of our riders, and I say this very respectfully and humbly, a lot of these guys do have contracts with OEMs, even at an amateur level, right? So they have their key races that we need to peak. Well, you're taking the whole calendar year. We're not working January to December. We're working August to August because that's the one that matters. So, and this is, I am not going to mention any names, not because I'm trying to hide anything, because the names are not what's important. What we as a company love is when our athlete will, like, let's say we're in the November, let's say mini O's, it up to and including Daytona and Spring Nationals. Our athletes are training really, really heavy because it's still preseason. So we're coming in with a butter knife to Spring Nationals. So if we get second or third, it's kind of like a champion that gets third on his bad day.
right.
We have people that are beating their chest going, oh my gosh, I beat XYZ rider and he won Loretta's last year. We love that because what they don't realize is we came in with almost 20 hours of week on the body. We didn't taper down. We shed no fatigue. We just went racing. And so now you've got people that are like, oh yeah, I beat so-and-so who won Loretta's last year. Did you really? If you think you did, that's cool. And it might give you a little bit of a psychological edge where actually it's going to be used as a whipping tool, because when you find out that our athlete is actually not even beginning to, they're still in preseason mode during November, December, January. They're moving into pre-competitive mode. We've just started dropping in speed work when we get to Daytona and Spring Nationals.
And that's what it's a plan. And it's a lot of people don't understand. You have to have.
We're okay with top 5 because that's why when you see in my social medias, when I say this is part of the plan, I'll give you a perfect example, and I will use his name as Chase DeShiel, right? He's one of my factory riders. He's our youngest factory rider. The only person that's as young as him is my Australian factory rider, Soren Staudinger. And with Chase, we went to our first qualifier and he stamped his card in 2 classes. So then he went to the next regional, that regional, and he raced 2 different classes. Why would we want to do that? Because what he wants to do is now we get 4 weeks out from Loretta's. He wants to see what class is going to have the deepest talent, and he's going to register for those 2 classes. Because you can't say you're the best until you beat the best. And you don't think that the people that are decision makers in our sport don't know that you're going and sandbagging a class that there's nobody in it? Just because you say you won Loretta.
Yeah, we talked about this last podcast, I think, or before, about if you're chasing the stock classes to avoid the factory boys. I get it.
Mistake. It's
right?
a mistake.
But yeah, if you want to be a factory boy, you're going to have to beat a factory boy. And that's
some riders. You can't say you're the best until you beat the best. Now, I do have athletes that are top 10 to top 15, and they, they're looking, they want to race the Sawyer Geiks. They want to race the Aiden Steinbreckers. They want to race the Bronx Grundys. They want to race the Chase DeShields. They want to race those guys that are the tip of the spear, right? But they know that they're a 15th place guy. But what we do differently, how much are you off the pace? Okay, well, last year you were 13 seconds per lap off the pace. This year you're 8 seconds off the pace. Now stop and think about this. If Sawyer Geick and Chase DeShiel and Aiden Steinbrecher, if they've gotten 1 or 2 seconds faster, and last year you were 14 seconds off of them, well, they've gotten faster, and now you're down to 8 seconds. Both guys, this guy's as important to me as this guy, but you got to think about it. When you're a Sawyer Geick and you've already won Lorettas, when you're at Aiden Steinbrecher and you've already won Lorettas, when you're Chase DeShiel and you've already won Lorettas, right? You're the pinnacle. And there's a big difference. There's a lot of athletes are never trained to be the chase E. They're only taught to be the chaser. So then when they finally get to the top, they don't have the skills to keep trying to get better because they don't have somebody to chase. This is
not around it, right?
Huge downfall of facilities. Huge
Right.
downfall. All facilities.
We talked about this before, but it was along the lines of, if you're a parent, you're really chasing this. You have to take that, what you just said, into account. Maybe we're still not winning, but is my kid getting actually closer to the front?
That's all we care about.
And so if you know, a lot of families are 20th at Loretta's and 20th and 20th and 20th and 20th and 20th. And it's like, sorry, you're not making progress. Your kid is getting better, but everybody else is getting better. So you need to make progress. And like you said, that if you have a kid that in every year is making a step, not just results, but like the lap time is getting closer to the pinnacle, and clearly, like very clearly so, okay, we're making progress. And if we're not, well, you got to reevaluate.
You have to start with the deviations, like we said earlier.
Right.
I need a 10-lap moto with less than 2 seconds deviation, period.
Well,
if it's 5 laps, it's 1 second. We only use it because Loretta's is obviously at the amateur level. So in 10 laps, I need no more than 2 seconds from start to finish. If we go to a regional and it's, 5 laps, I'm looking for 1 second deviation, because that's what we refer to as your critical speed numbers. And then once I've got the consistencies, we eliminate the big deviations. You hear Mitch Payton say this all the time. We can work with speed. We can work with speed. So it doesn't matter if you lay down a 1 lap is 2 minutes, and then you're 2:17, then you're 2:08, then you're 2:19, and then you're 2:03. Talk to Mitch Payton. He sits and watches the transponder, and all he cares about is consistency. So my whole thing is if I'm trying to prepare my riders to get the KTM ride, the Cowie ride, all these different opportunities that are out there. Like if I'm handing off a rider to Daniel Blair at Club, if I'm handing off a rider to Lucas Myrtle to go do his magic, right? I have a responsibility to make sure that the teams are getting, let me rephrase that. I want to make sure that I'm setting the rider up and their parents, so when they get presented to a team, I already know what they're looking at. That's what we've trained for 5 to 10 years. Hey, you've got to start with consistency, because if you aren't consistent, Mitch Payton's not interested in looking at you.
Yeah. And on that point is, like, if you really look at what Hammaker had done this year, he's probably always been this fast. I really think so. But this year they hammered in some consistency. Now, granted, he's had some crashes, but I mean, this is his best overall consistency year. That's what they worked on in whatever this offseason was saying, hey, you got to be able to repeat this lap. I tell people all the time, especially if you're not winning the outdoors, right? So if you're like a 30th to 40th or a 20th to any position, right? If you're not winning, what you see very often is, okay, well, we were, 90 seconds off at the end of the race, or we were 100, more than that or less than that. Your goal over the outdoors should be to close that delta. And a lot of times it doesn't take more speed. That's what a lot of guys don't understand. Hey, I'm off in qualifying. I got to work on speed. Yeah, you are off in qualifying. You're not going to win an outdoor with the pace you have. However, the pace, your best pace out there would have gotten you, in the outdoors, if you're 15 seconds faster overall the whole race, that could be from 30th to 20th, right? Like you have got to work to improve that consistency, like you said, lap over lap over lap. And granted, the track changes, whatever. But if you're like in any form of sport that's an endurance race, which we would call Lorettas, we would call pro, just making that gap decrease will dramatically improve your performance overall. And I think a lot of people miss that. It's unfortunate, but they just work on that 1 lap speed a lot. And it's like, hey, that's great. If you want to win, you're going to need it. But if you're not quite ready to win, it doesn't help you.
Let me share a dirty little secret, and we can wrap up with this.
Yeah.
Think about this dirty little secret. If I can train your athlete we get them fit enough, they build a big enough strength base, and they build a big enough aerobic engine, and they can keep that delta of change to a minimum. My goal is 1 second per 5 laps. When we get that consistency established, my athlete, and I'm going to share a little bit of a trade secret here. My athletes don't get concerned if at Loretta's we come around on lap number 1 and we're in 22nd place. We still have 9 more laps. We're not worried about it. We're not riding overhead. We certainly aren't going to throw it away in the first 5 laps. So my athlete, 2-minute lap time, 2-minute lap time, 20.1, 0.1. We're a tenth of a second off here or there, right? Well, if you watch the lap time, if you watch the final positioning, right? We're 21st, we're 16, we're 12. Because consistency, and again, Derek, you're a big statistician with this, right? Consistency wins the race every single time. So now you take it one step further. Your athlete, for the sake of the listeners, your athlete makes a mistake. We talked about this earlier. They go anaerobic in lap number 2 because they don't know. They haven't been trained. So they just pin it to win it because that's what the facilities always say. You just got to go, got to go, got to go, got to go. That's not true because once you go anaerobic, now you're running 206s, 207s because you went anaerobic. It's not a fitness issue. You just simply cross that threshold. My athlete's knocking out 2-minute lap times, and he or she knows that they can hold that for 20 laps. Yes, 20 laps. Remember, said we can go 40 minutes. We know we can.
And like you said, there's a people don't grasp. There's a pace you can sustain for these durations. People don't understand that. So whatever that pace is, you have to know it.
But here's the key. If the listener's athlete starts going 202s, 204s, and my athlete's holding 2 minutes, now your athlete has gone anaerobic. My athlete catches yours. Your athlete tries to latch on. They end up going down because they're anaerobic. And now they go from 4th to 18th to 23rd to 33. Which athlete would you want underneath the impound area? Well, obviously your athlete's not going to be in the impound because they're not in top 10. And the reason why I say that, again, very respectfully, is let's take it from moto and let's say that me and the listener, we're running a 5K running race and the gun goes off and I sprint like I stole something. And then I grenade myself at mile 1. I cross that anaerobic threshold. But the listener, his strategy was, I'm just going to hold an even pace. Well, now you catch me. I'm breathing so hard, I'm about to throw up.
Right.
You've systematically held a good pace. Well, now you break me physically and mentally because I can't hold on to you. So now I just watch you drift away from me. And now you've cracked me mentally as well as you've beaten me physically. What's Loretta's? It's all about confidence come Saturday morning. So this is where we have to have the maturity, and especially moto dads, you need to take a deep breath, put a big smile on your face because I know it's frustrating, but you have to realize your athlete has to race at an intensity that they know that they can finish. And that may not mean that your athlete's going to be able to win the race. My job is to make sure that my athletes, when they go race, we know that their 80, 85% effort is everybody else's 100% effort for this exact reason. Because now my athlete doesn't get all wigged out when they're not in the top 20 on the first lap. We would love to be because it's a lot less crowded out there and a lot of less things happen. But I've got to be careful because I don't think that the gate draw for motos number 1 are legitimately fair anymore, but that's a different conversation. But back in the day when you could pick a chip, right? My athlete could pick 39 just like anybody else could. Well, you don't want to throw it away in the first lap, but you could certainly lose the entire week in the first lap. So you say, okay, I've got 10 laps, stay out of trouble, but we don't go anaerobic. We just
Well, and you nailed something that I try to tell clients for regionals and the C-class dads can't grasp. And they're C-class because they never made Lorettas. And they make the same mistakes over and over again. If we take off the physiological side of what we talked about here, training and being fit and whatever, I had one, and I hope he probably doesn't listen to the show, thankfully, but if he does, I love him to death. He knows that. His kid came to the regional here, pulled practically every hole shot. We did our job. Was up front, had the speed every moto. He did his job, like on the speed side. And he had enough fitness. He had done enough of the work, to do it. But the kid crashed almost every moto in qualifying positions. Like you had extra spots to give. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, when you go to these regional type races, like, which you nailed earlier, it's like, we're at 80, 85%. You need to have that mentality when you're trying to accomplish it's not a one moto run what you run, winner takes all format. It's 3 motos. So if you go get a 9th because you were just a little off, that's a lot better than being second and getting 14th because you pissed it away because you're riding at 100%. Your athlete needs what I call reserve. So if you're at a race, you'll be able to ride at 80, 85. And once in a blue moon, you have that ability to kick it up a gear. Oh, I need this pass. Okay, 3 corners. I'm going to give it good, and then I'm going to back off so I can stay underneath my threshold.
What do you think you're seeing Jet and Hayden do right now? They realize that they don't have to win by 45 seconds. Now, in all fairness, Jet and Hayden both, if somebody's pressuring them, they'll throw a surge in, they'll put 3 seconds, and then they hang there. Now, those two guys are putting 35, 40 seconds on the third place guy, but it's not because they're just trying to constantly just keep pushing and pushing. They're just managing the race.
I think well, James hit this on the head, and James would have been the way better career had he done the jet approach, right? We know that. And it's no offense to James. He's one of our best
Oh,
ever,
he
right?
says it all the time. Yeah, he says it all the time.
Jet, and I mean, James says it in weird ways because it relates to his mind because he was so talented, right? So it's not normal to us. But he said Jet isn't beating them with speed or being better than them, which he is. But, you know, his wording is he's beating them through just consistently chipping away at them. Like, he basically is going to be this rabbit you're chasing and you're trying your ass off, but Jet's not. And he sees you get a little close and he squirts out. And then you work your ass off and then he sees you a little close and he squirts out. And he just wears you down because you're at your 100 or James said it well, is like when you think you have to go fast, sometimes you push too hard. And Jet's able to just go fast without pushing hard.
Well, think about this one step above that, right? If Jet, and this happened at Hangtown, he realized there's about 10 minutes left in the moto. He realized he wasn't making up any time on Tomac. What were his exact words on the podium? I said to myself, let's conserve energy and get ready for second moto. Today's whole conversation is about recovery, right? Jet's making an executive decision. Yeah, people are going to say, oh, the perfect season's over. He doesn't care. You don't get awards for perfect season. You get awards for winning the championship and winning each weekend, right?
And somebody has ingrained it in his mind that other key, and that's it, you nailed it for regionals, for example, or Lorettas. It's a 3 moto format. You cannot, you can certainly lose it in Moto 1. You can't win it in Moto 1. And so you have to understand, like, it's a business decision, quote unquote, is like, you know what? My dad and the dads need to understand this. He was right there, son. First moto, you could have had him if you just pushed harder. And the kid's like, Dad, it was late. I was pretty tired. The track was slick. The shadows are weird. And he had a better start and I worked my way. You know, you were faster the whole moto. You know what? I did. I earned that second. I had to work to it. But you know what? That's Moto 1, Dad. Next moto, maybe I can get the whole shot. Maybe I can get out front and see what we got. And that can put me into position for Moto 3. But I certainly could have crashed and gone back to 4th, 5th, 10th, 20th. And now we're a whole week at Loretta's is done. And I'll try to tell it to a guy who qualified in C class. Congrats to them. And I said, hey, the number one mistake, if your kid makes this mistake, I'm going to come punch you in the gut, jokingly, right? Is do not crash out in practice at Loretta's. Don't become that reason why some alternate gets in. Like, and how many people are going to do that in the C class for their first time at Loretta's or whatever, right? You can lose
20 or 30 of them.
So quick.
20 or 30 of them.
Right?
And go back to what Jet was saying at Hangtown, right? He realizes 10 minutes left, 5 minutes left. All right, I'm going to conserve energy for moto number 2. And then, because it was so hot, they ended up pulling the plug and cutting the race short. No big deal. Hangtown, it is what it is. Well, what did that do for Jet? It set him up for the next round. Because you got to, what we started today's conversation.
Cumulative fatigue, right?
You got to recover hour by hour, day by day, week by week. And then, obviously, the pro motocross is a brutal series going from January now to October. None of these guys are coming in at January in peak form. Not one.
They can't.
They're coming in good form, but they're coming in at a fitness level that allows them to sustain it for 10 months.
And if you, like you said, hour by hour, like Jet's able to get that recovery earlier for the next moto. He gets what he needs on the start, gets out front, and then it's a shorter moto, which helps out for the next week. And then the other side of that is if he's not putting full output out every week late in this outdoor season, and his competition, Tomac's same, they're all smart, right?
Yep.
They're going to be strong, whereas I've seen it all the time in the 250s, and I'm not throwing shade. All these guys, let me just be clear. Every single dude on the outdoor nationals is unbelievable. Every single one of them. They will blow your minds if you ever get to ride with them at your local track. So first off and foremost, right, they're just unreal. The top 20 in both classes are just out of this world aliens, right? That said, like, you're going to see a couple guys in the 250 class who are phenomenal right now, top 10 guys, top 5 guys, that late in this outdoor season not just fall off a cliff. And you're like, where the hell happened to this guy? Why was he 5th and 4th and 3rds and 8th and 9th and amazing? And all of a sudden he's like struggling for 15th and 16th and 17th and 20th. 1 or 2 of them will come out, you know, they're sick. They can't race this weekend because to your point, they're putting it all on the line right now. It came in a little too peaked and they're not recovering throughout the season. Now that's the nature of the beast. If you're 5th, your team's pushing on you to go get first, right? It is what it is. But like you said,
and think about this as kind of a closing thought. My athletes, our focus is always Loretta's. Most of that's because of OEM obligations. So of all the other races, right, I hate to say it, but if you win it, no one's going to talk about it as much as Loretta's.
Nope.
For all the reasons. Number one, it's a national
Yep.
championship. Number two, it's the longest moto of the year.
Yes.
And so if you want to really get the attention of Mitch Payton and Bobby Reagan and all these guys that really matter, Bobby Hewitt, I don't know where he's at, but I hope he comes back soon. You start putting all these together, right? And the idea is if you really want to catch somebody's eye, nobody cares that you can sprint for 4 laps at a qualifier. What they do care in some of these early season races where, again, it's ridiculously short. So if you're looking to go pro, play the landscape as to how you're going to get recognized, the Weston Pikes of the world. Not a stellar amateur career, not a bad one, but not one that you'd put on par with Jet Reynolds. And yet Weston had it very successful, did very well for himself financially in the 450 class.
Well, as
He showed that he could go distance. And
right. One thing that you were talking about recovery day by day or minute by minute, second by second, day by day, year by year, right? Type of a deal. The reality is if you are on the track to be pro, then that preparation is starting now, like not just Loretta's to your point, but it's all the way through. And additionally, it's like if your kid comes out of amateurs going into pro wore out, you're effed because pro only gets harder. So the schedule increases, the duration increases, the motos increase. It's an hour recovery time at the outdoor nationals. It's not that quick. So you're really effed. So I think like what your point is you got, what did you say? Your line is you can only, training wise, you can only accept as much as you can recover. And so people need to put the amount, and that's not called being lazy, as you've said, but you need to put as much emphasis on this recovery aspect as you do on your training blocks. And if you're not recovered, you can't train.
the definition is overtraining is not absorbing the volume you're doing. It doesn't matter how much volume you're doing. It has to be specific to you. And again, I'm trying to give away all of our trade secrets, but think about it. The number one focus is seat time. So if you as a parent tell me, look, and we all respect money's an issue for all, right? It's an expensive sport. If you say to me, Rob, money's not an issue. We can ride 5 days a week. Great. I'll build the training program around that volume of riding. If you say, Rob, the most we can afford because of logistics and or keeping bikes fresh is 3 days a week. All right, the workout around 3 days a week. If you can afford 1 day a week, we do it around that. Whatever time we can't put on the motorcycle, we do it off the motorcycle. Well, what makes our program so unique is everything we do off the motorcycle complements what you do on a motorcycle. I'm not training your son or daughter for the Tour de France or the Olympic swimming. We use swimming, cycling, and running because each of those sports have different benefits. We use a gravel bike. We use a road bike. We use a mountain bike. We use an e-bike. We use whatever you got. But if you tell me, hey, I kind of ride the motorcycle 1 hour a week, I can still put 10 hours, I'm using that number very loosely. I can put 5 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours on your athlete with the goal of going pro. So that's what we have to be very careful. It's very easy, especially with the internet today. I can fill your inbox up with thousands of workouts. They're fun, they're creative, they're challenging. It doesn't matter. The workouts need to be written around the seat time, and the seat time has to have specificity of purpose. This is another thing that we do that distinguishes us from so-called trainers and facilities. Right. I'm just not interested in you just doling you grinding and grinder because sprinting doesn't create speed. It helps hone in depth perception. There's a benefit in the time for it, but not every time you get on the motorcycle. And always discussion about recovery is exactly that. It's not what you do, it's your ability to recover from.
Right. It's not what you do, it's your ability to recover from it. You can work yourself into the dirt. Yep. If you don't recover from it, you're just into the dirt.
Yeah, you become a part of the dirt, unfortunately. Yeah. Like you said, right, there's that ability to get better, and then it starts to go into regression mode if we want to avoid it. So,
well, your bike's the same way, right? We can run that bike until it's gonna blow up and does blow up. Yep. It's no longer useful. Your body, it can do the exact same thing. And unfortunately, every year at the pro level, which you can always look for, there's 1 or 2 guys who have done that. And of course, those guys are on the fine line. So they're pushing everything, right?
Exactly. I know it's good stuff.
All right. Well, thanks, Rob.
Yep. Thank you very much for all you guys. Like you said earlier, Derek, if you're new, welcome. And if you've been with us since the episode number 1, thank you so much. We hope you've learned a little bit more this week. Derek, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your insights, depth. I get a lot of positive responses after every video or a webinar that we do together, a podcast show, depending on what format you guys are listening. Thank you for all the support. Again, we'd like to thank Precision Transport for making this podcast happen. And we'll see you guys in a month. Be safe.
Thanks, Coach.